Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, The Essential Guide to Digital Accessibility. For many of you, this is your busy season. I know it can be difficult to make the time to attend, so thank you for being here. For anyone who is not able to watch the entire webinar today, the recording will also be available to watch online and on our website within a week. I'm joined today by Delaney Cruz, Head of Partner Program at AudioEye, as well as Stephen Ash, a Partner Account Manager at AudioEye. Delaney will be presenting for us today, after which we'll have time set aside for Q&A. And that being said, Delaney and Stephen, thanks so much for coming on to present on this topic today. I'll go ahead and pass it over to you. Thank you.
Awesome. First and foremost, thanks so much for giving us the time to present to you all and the other attendees today. So as it was mentioned, what we're going to be presenting on today is the Essential Guide to Digital Accessibility, essentially offering some insight into digital accessibility as a whole, who AudioEye is, what it is that we do, and kind of what you can expect from the partnership that we have with ResNexus. So, moving forward on my slides, what we will cover today, we're going to start with what is web accessibility and why is it important? Then we're going to get into web accessibility guidance and corresponding laws, followed by accessibility best practices. So hopefully whoever is attending will have some information that they can take with them as a result, some learnings from this presentation. And then finally, we'll quickly review the ResNexus and AudioEye solutions. So what you can expect when working with ResNexus and the AudioEye partnership. So what is web accessibility and why is it important? What does web accessibility mean? Web accessibility means that people are not excluded from using something on the basis of experiencing a disability. So a good analogy that we tend to utilize is that web accessibility is essentially like the ramps and rails of the digital world. So similarly to where we often experience ramps and rails existing in like a brick and mortar situation, ensuring that we have web accessibility best practices in place help to ensure that individuals utilizing assistive technology have equal access to the web, similarly to what ramps and rails provide for them in a brick and mortar situation. Why is it important? Right here, I have a couple of data points to share essentially some information regarding, who is impacted by disability, and then what the current state of web accessibility is on the web today. So 26% of adults in the US identify as having a disability, so essentially 1/4 of the US population. 96% of the top 1 million home pages have accessibility errors. So what that really tells us is only about 4% of just the home page on websites can actually be deemed accessible, fully accessible to individuals with disabilities / individuals utilizing assistive technology. And then $13 trillion in annual income is controlled by people with disabilities, their families, and friends. So an additional data point in regards to kind of return on investment in helping ensure that your website is accessible to individuals with disabilities. Accessible for some, helpful for all. I think it's really common to have an understanding of accessibility that they are something that individuals are born with, but I think it's also important to keep in mind the different forms of disability that exist and how they may or may not impact someone's life or an individual in their family's lives. So the way we kind of bucket these is permanent, temporary, and situational. So an example would be, if we're speaking about auditory disabilities, we could say permanent would be an individual who's deaf. Temporary could be some sort of illness like an ear infection. So you temporarily experience a disability, but you will no longer have a disability at some point in time in the future. And then another example is situational. So this example for auditory is construction. Why you need web accessibility. An accessible website drives customer engagement and reduces legal compliance and brand risks. So the way that we typically tend to bucket the reasoning for why you need web accessibility is into 4 individual pillars. So there's legal compliance, customer satisfaction, brand discoverability, and brand reputation. Legal compliance is one that people are going to be pretty familiar with, in the fact that having an accessible website is required by law. Under the ADA, websites are deemed places of public accommodation, therefore they must be accessible to individuals with disabilities. When we talk about customer satisfaction, accessible content improves engagement, making it more user-friendly for people with and without disabilities. The disability community is an incredibly loyal and vocal community. So ensuring that you have accessible experiences is going to be really important when it comes to customer satisfaction. Brand discoverability, this is something that isn't as people aren't as aware of when it comes to the importance of accessibility. But accessible websites are easier for search engines and voice experiences to index, boosting discoverability and SEO, which we know is incredibly important when we're discussing performance of websites. Lastly, brand reputation. This kind of ties into customer satisfaction a little bit. Reduce your brand risk and improve reputation by supporting diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, specifically regarding individuals with disabilities in the disability community. Web accessibility guidance and corresponding laws. Digital accessibility in the law. I know I mentioned earlier that under the ADA, websites are considered places of public accommodation. Therefore, they must be accessible to individuals with disabilities. In 2022, the DOJ released guidance stating that websites, are places of public accommodation, therefore they must be accessible. Specifics when it comes to the law are kind of listed here on this slide here. So Title III specifically of the ADA is the legislation that rules websites to be places of public accommodation. When we're thinking about what could happen if a website is sued for not being accessible, injunctive relief plus attorney's fees and costs, but not damages. However, the DOJ can seek damages. When we're thinking about something that's more specific to states and not as much on a federal level, which the ADA is more of a federal level, individual states have their own laws regarding web accessibility, some stricter than others. For example, the Unruh Civil Rights Act, also, which is in California, also requires effective communication by incorporating the ADA into the statute, and $4,000 in attorney's fees for each violation plus injunctive relief are on the table if someone is to be sued for their website not being accessible. So just things to keep in mind in terms of what can essentially be expected, again, if a site is found to not be accessible and some sort of legal action is to be faced. Recently, beyond the guidance that was released in 2022, there have been other updates, very recent updates actually, to accessibility legislation, one back in April and one as recent as May. So Title II of the ADA, which really applies to kind of like city, local, state government or government funded organizations needing to be accessible. New guidance was released in April of 2024, which essentially increased enforcement of accessibility policies and cauterized WCAG 2.1 AA standards. So WCAG, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, are the globally recognized standard for accessibility. So any work when it comes to ensuring a website is accessible, is going to be based on these rules and standards under WCAG. So this was really a landmark new regulation because instead of just broadly stating that a site needed to be accessible in general, it pointed to specific standards that actually need to be followed. And again, this Title II of the ADA was specifically for like city, local, state government websites and digital platforms, which also includes like mobile apps. Needing to be accessible according to WCAG 2.1 AA. This also includes like public schools. In addition to that, where we're also seeing some updates is in May of 2024, so just last month, Section 504, the Rehabilitation Act, new regulation was rolled out under that Section 504, which directly applies to all programs or activities that receive federal financial assistance or state financial assistance if there are local, other local systems in place from the Department of Health and Human Services. This also cauterizes WCAG 2.1 AA standard. The reason why these are important is that both of these were recently released, and it's just going to waterfall from here, because now when we think about many lawsuits that happen under Title III, which say websites are places of public accommodation and therefore must be accessible, in the legal space, there are now more precedences to point to in order to assist in bringing legal action against a client's website or a customer's website. Just a couple numbers in regards to trends, federal web accessibility litigation trends specifically. So as we can kind of see, the trend is that they're increasing. We typically tend to see 12 to 14% increase year over year in terms of litigation. And they also tend to be highly concentrated in very specific states. So as we can see here from the years 2019 to 2022, that applied mostly to New York, Florida, and California. However, we do continue to see lawsuits across other states, and these are only ones filed federally. So these numbers don't include any sort of state-specific legal action, as well as things like demand letters. So demand letters being something that an attorney might send out to an individual who owns a website to say, hey, we found some accessibility issues on your site. You know, we won't file a lawsuit if you respond or what have you. These are just specific to lawsuits because there's no way for us to track all those individual letters. So that's an important thing to keep in mind, that these numbers are not entirely holistic of the current situation. Accessibility best practices. So I hope people are ready to take notes. First things first, which I'm sure many people are probably aware of the importance of alt text, but add alt text for all important images. Alt text is a written description of an image that screen readers can read out loud or convert to Braille for people with visual impairments, sensory processing disorders, or learning disorders. This is very commonly called out in things like lawsuits because not having alt text present on a website really impacts an individual's ability to have an equal experience of a website as, for example, a sighted user. Accessible text content. Headings. Headings help visual and screen reader users skim the text for the content they want. Simple language. Using simple language offers clear meaning to people of all ages and literacy levels. Color contrast. Text should stand out from the background, making it easier to read. One thing that I'd also like to call out on this slide as well are things like headings and color contrast. Again, added note, these are issue types that we tend to see called out the most in legal action. So making sure that you can harness these best practices when you're uploading content to your website is going to be really important, because not only are they things that are called out in lawsuits quite often, but it's because these are really, really vital when we're talking about an equal experience of a website for an individual with a disability. Give visitors multiple ways to get in touch. Not everyone has the same level of ability or preference for communication. Provide multiple contact options on your website. Offer other ways to get in touch, like email, live web chat, or online forms that accommodate all users. Obviously, on top of that, helping to ensure that all of these forms for communication are also accessible. Now, the ResNexus and AudioEye solution. AudioEye in general is a web accessibility platform and services built for and by the members of the disability community for today's businesses. Our AI-based automation technology is backed by certified experts, and having a partner in the accessibility space, such as AudioEye, an expert in the space, will help to protect your site from lawsuits and help improve user experience and demonstrate your commitment to diversity and inclusivity. The way that our solution works is we are a JavaScript-based technology. So essentially, once our solution is installed on a website, we are actively monitoring that website and additional new content added for accessibility issues. In that process, we are able to find issues as well as fix them in real time for every user. So the way this kind of looks, how we do it, is our AI-based automation finds and fixes a majority of common issues, leaving much less work for humans. This is our technology-first approach to accessibility. So kind of as I mentioned before, step one, following our JavaScript being installed on a website, our automation finds the most issues. So every single time an individual visits a website, we are actually scanning that page for accessibility issues, and then auto fix on page reload, we are live deploying fixes to that web page. Step three, monitor. So on every single time that someone visits a web page, we are rescanning that page for accessibility issues. And then optimize. Our huge database of fixes improves the automation. So the more situations for different issues we're able to come across, the more websites we're monitoring, helps to broaden the knowledge of our AI-based automation and improve our testing suite. So what you get with the ResNexus AudioEye solution: finding, fixing, and maintaining at scale. So what your subscription would include is the automated test and fixing. So once the JavaScript is live on the site, we are actively monitoring for accessibility issues while also deploying fixes in real time for every website visitor. Visual toolkit with 24/7 help desk. As many individuals may have seen before, there is a visual toolkit located on websites enabled with AudioEye that provide, if you open it up, you'll see options for temporary accommodations to adjust a website to improve an individual user's experience. So things like adjusting contrast, or maybe for someone with low vision, they need to increase the cursor size or increase the text size. Within that usability toolbar, there is also access to a 24/7 help desk that is manned by our AudioEye team. So essentially, if someone is to visit the website and experience an accessibility issue live, they have a grievance procedure available to them through that visual toolkit / 24/7 help desk, where they can actually report directly to our team that they have experienced an accessibility issue, and our team can work to correct that. Additionally, you will also be entitled to a compliance plan for ADA, Section 508, and more, which is a full WCAG-based compliant plan, provides necessary compliance documentation, such as the Sustainable Testing and Remediation Plan, Accessibility Statement, and Trusted Certification. The STAR plan, or Sustainable Testing and Remediation Plan, essentially outlines how AudioEye is interacting with a website to help ensure that it's accessible to individuals with disabilities. Oftentimes, this is utilized as initial response documentation to legal action. So there we're able to help support in case of legal action being brought against a website. Finally, for a limited time deal in partnership with ResNexus, they are offering $30 a month and first month free if the AudioEye solution is added by September 30th of 2024 of this year, so a few months from now. Typically, this same tier of service is $59 a month if purchased just directly from us through the marketplace. So yeah, that was kind of the full presentation. I think if we want to move into questions, maybe.
Yeah, that'll be great. Thank you so much for presenting, Delaney. Really appreciate it. I think thought you did a fantastic job. I want to quickly take over for just a moment. Let me just share my screen here. And I want this one. Yes. Okay. All right, so we'll get to the Q&A in just a moment, but I'll just say that if you did enjoy this webinar and want to view any of our past ones, you can do so on our website, resnexus.com. And if you go to the webinars section under education, you can view our entire library of past webinars, and you can also register for upcoming webinars on this page. With that, we will move on to the Q&A at this time. I do have Casey Cousins on. He's going to help us out. He is with ResNexus. He's the marketing director at ResNexus, and he'll be able to help us out with any ResNexus related questions with the integration. All right, so with that, I think I'll go ahead and open it up for the Q&A. I actually do have a few questions of my own to kick things off. Would that be all right?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, awesome. So just out of curiosity, I was kind of wondering, what are some of the most common errors or mistakes that businesses make for website accessibility?
Yeah, I think definitely referring to some of those instances that I referenced under the best practices slides. So when we're thinking about things like alt text, right? Many websites have tons and tons of images. They're probably constantly or at least consistently updated. And so it's super important for businesses to help ensure that they have proper alt text listed for those images and are continuing to be vigilant about updating that as content is updated, because that's something that we tend to see is missing on many websites, as well as are issues that are often called out in things like legal action, because again, not having alt text and descriptive alt text present on a website really impacts individuals with disabilities from having an equal experience of the web, which our main goal is to ensure that everyone has an equal experience of digital spaces.
Fantastic. And that actually leads me into another question I had, which is about alt text. So thank you for leading me into that.
Yeah.
See, I think a lot of us definitely understand the importance of having alt text on images, but it's not always super clear exactly like how descriptive you have to be. Do you have any guidance on how detailed to make that alt text?
Yeah, so being as descriptive as possible is always going to be a good rule of thumb. However, making sure that character length, I believe, is limited to about 100. You do just want to be conscious that it's not too long, because when we're thinking about an individual's who's utilizing assistive technology, their experience, you don't want it to read a novel, right? So being as descriptive as possible while also being effective and to the point in your descriptions are going to be important when it comes to communicating what needs to be communicated, but also not over communicating so that they're sitting listening to a description for a really long time instead of progressing through the website.
That's great. I wonder if a good, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I wonder if a good rule of thumb is just to act as if you're trying to describe it to someone in the room who can't see the screen, just to get the
Yeah,
message across to them in a way that seems natural. Does that seem?
absolutely. Absolutely. And in a way where you're not effectively you're not effectively losing some part of the experience, right? So a good example we like to use is, let's say we're looking at we'll say like a car website. That's usually a really easy analogy. And someone has, it's a picture, and if they were to have the alt text be red car, but it's actually like a Ferrari, right? There's going to be a lot of loss of experience of that website if the alt text is just red car versus some descriptors that are important to help indicate a Ferrari and what a Ferrari looks like in the experience of an image of a Ferrari.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then I had one more for you. Just asking about kind of the AudioEye system and how it works. Can you give me an example of something that the autofix might handle for a web page? What kind of change it might make to help make it more accessible?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the fixes that are the most common for us to deploy automatically has to do with links on a website that open in a new window. So if a website is developed in a way where a link opens in a new window, but there's nothing built into it that makes an announcement to someone utilizing assistive technology that by clicking on the link, they're opening a new window, that creates a trap, right? Because nothing's going to be announced that lets them know that in order to get back to the screen they are originally on, they need to close a window. So something that our automation can do is they can detect those situations and also deploy changes to the DOM level of the website, which we could get into if you have questions later on about that. That will actually effectively create that announcement for an individual utilizing a screen reader, for example, to let them know, hey, the link you're opening right now opens in a new window. So they know that if they want to return to the content they were experiencing before, they need to actually close out the window they're in.
Gotcha. That's great to know. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Looks like we don't have a lot of questions today. Like I said, this webinar will also be available to watch online within a few days. If people do have any questions about AudioEye and they want to get in contact with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, I think I would always err on the side of reaching out to ResNexus first, and then they'll be sure to kind of get in contact with us if there's any sort of additional assistance required.
All right, makes sense. So in that case, what I'll do is yeah, if you have any questions, just reach out to your support representative or to websites, and they'll be able to hopefully help out however they can. Um, all right. Oh, let's see. Okay, we do have actually the question just came in. Someone asked, what happens if I get legal notice when using AudioEye?
Yeah, great question. So the way that that process works is you would be provided with that sustainable testing and remediation plan. So again, that STAR plan really outlines how AudioEye is interacting with the website to help ensure it is compliant. And you can utilize that, providing it to, your legal counsel to utilize as initial response documentation to a plaintiff's attorney. So if you were to face any sort of legal action, a lot of times clients will utilize that sustainable testing and remediation plan. And we've seen tons of success with clients seeing either plaintiff's attorneys looking the other way, or also potentially a lot of times we see an increase in negotiating leverage. So it's really helping to wield that documentation to really communicate your commitment to accessibility and ensuring accessible experiences.
That makes a lot of sense. Get the message across. We're doing our
Yep,
best.
absolutely.
All right.
And that you're partnered with an expert in the space.
Exactly.
Well,
Exactly.
yeah.
All right.
Question.
Well, yeah, great question. Thank you very much. Well, it looks like that might be about it for today. So I'll just say thank you once again to everyone who attended, and thank you as well to AudioEye. Thank you, Delaney and Stephen, for being on. We really appreciate you presenting this for our audience today.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Okay. All right. Have a great rest of your week, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks.